Welcome to the Mindful Leadership Podcast. How do we navigate through all the noise, distractions, and pressures to make thoughtful, conscious decisions that are better for us, our people, our customers, and our organizations? How do we know if we're busy and effective or just too busy to be effective? In this podcast, we talk to leaders who share their stories about challenging existing paradigms and doing different things differently. I'm your host, Shahana Banerjee, founder and CEO of Just Human, Not Resources, on a mission to humanize the future of work. In this episode, we talk to one of the best bosses I've ever worked with, Joydeep Bose. He is the Managing Director and Global Head of Human Resources at Olam, a relentless advocate of his people, a well-loved leader, a mentor, a friend, and an inspiration to many. Joydeep, I'm so delighted and beyond thrilled to have you on this podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Shana, for having me here.
So, we have known each other forever, and you know me perhaps a little too well, right? The good, bad, and the ugly. So, feel free not to share any of that with our listeners today. So let's dive right in. You've had an amazing story from, building things, right, as an engineer to building people up as a human resources leader. So it's been quite a journey. So tell us a little bit about your story and what got you to where you are today.
I'm an engineer by training. I trained as a civil engineer. I started my career building bridges, the physical kind of bridges. And quickly I moved on to another career where it was still building bridges, but not the very physical kind. It's building bridges between people and groups and teams. So that's been, in a nutshell, my story early on. At the age of 6, my parents, they put me into a boarding school. My father was working in a job where he was in a very rural environment where there were no proper educational facilities. So I was sent to a boarding school in a proper city. And I think that experience has influenced me in many of my decisions. Still remember the first day, my parents taking me to the boarding school and holding on to the window sills of the car, not wanting to get out of the car. And then my teachers from the boarding school heaving me out of the car and taking me in. I think the positive part of the 12 years that I spent in a boarding school has been that being with people. I mean, you are always with people, and the connections that you can create, that you can draw on, supporting others. And it's a community that you're in, a very, very close community where you're not related to each other and you're staying together from a very early age, supporting each other. And then thereafter, it's been one place to another. One other characteristic of my life is that I've spent time in many places. While my schooling was in Calcutta, my parents were in another part of the country. I moved on from school into my grad school, which was in Jaipur, Rajasthan, a very pretty place. I did my engineering there over a period of 5 years. And then I worked as a civil engineer building bridges, and an immense experience I gained there. My first job was to start a project where you construct a bridge right from literally from ground level, where there was nothing there in a very, very rural part of India. So I went there and I started the project. 2 years time, I realized that I needed to do something different, something else. And that's when I moved into doing a full-time course on human resources. So I joined a premier school in India, which dealt with labor relations or human resources, and from then became an HR professional.
That's wonderful. Since then, your career has, of course, taken off, first with Wipro and then with Olam. So, talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so Wipro you're quite familiar with because we worked together in Wipro. So Wipro was a growth-led company, and then that's been another characteristic of organizations that I've worked with. Both these organizations have been growth-led. My whole career, professional career of 30 years, I've worked in only 3 organizations. During these 30 years, I've not had a dull moment. So Wipro moved around. It was a high growth technology environment where for the first time, I realized that culture in organizations, one of the driving factors of how employee friendly an organization is based on the pressures that the organization faces to hire, to attract, hire, and retain talent. In sectors where organizations face a high level of tension with their talent, you find winning companies are the ones which are most progressive with their talent practices. At Wipro, we also saw, and that's another one of pivotal experiences I've had where, at least in my part of the business, the entire senior leadership team move out and start a company which later on became very soon a $1 billion company on its
Those
own.
were the days.
Those were the days, and the kind of the crisis that Wipro went through when this huge team left. There's a lot to learn from that experience. There's a lot, and I still go back to those days. And each time I go back, I find new learnings, actually, what we could have done differently.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of the experience. Then I moved into my current organization, and that was a very, very unusual move. It was an unknown organization. We were a privately held company, and I was working for one of the largest tech companies then. And it meant a move away from India. Also, I had to move to Singapore. Olam is in the ag sector, in the food and the ag sector. And I met the CEO, the founder of the company, in one of my first meetings, and I was mesmerized by him and his vision. It was very, very small, and he's less than a few $100 million in turnover. So I got pretty attracted by his vision, and I joined him, came over to Singapore, and it's been a roller coaster of a ride since then. Truly, we grew from a few hundred employees to today where we have 75,000 employees. We grew from a footprint of 8 countries when I joined to a footprint of now 66 countries. And as I speak, we are going through the mother of all transformations, where we are splitting ourselves into 5 different independent entities. I'm moving out of my role. My role will not exist going forward, and I'm moving into a very different kind of a role. Very excited, very apprehensive at the same time, where I'm going to be working, where we are setting up an incubator, venture capital incubator, and I'm going to be supporting that incubator to grow new businesses. And hopefully, and these are tech businesses, digital businesses in the space of food and agri, using technology to disrupt some of the most challenging problems that this sector has been facing, and which will have impact, environmental impact mostly. Yeah. So we've already got a few ideas on. I'm very excited, very different. It's very discomforting also, because this is not what I've done in the past, and we can talk more about it.
And it's certainly a huge risk, right? I mean, but the fact is that if you're not nervous as hell, then it's probably not a challenging enough assignment.
Absolutely. I'm nervous, and the way to get over it is by reaching out to people in this. I mean, I knew nothing about the venture capital space. Now, every day I'm meeting at least a few people, 2-3 people in this space, trying to know more about it, and I realized that that this is a new space. I mean, the whole high growth space is very new, and many people are also trying to learn as they are making a space for themselves here.
That sector certainly is ripe for innovation.
The space that we have chosen for ourselves is, as I mentioned, is intersection, the sweet spot of the industry that we are familiar with, which is ag and food, technology as a disruptor, and and to address some of the very complex, intractable problems that the sector is facing on the sustainability side. So, I mean, we all know that the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases is agriculture. It is farming and agriculture that is the biggest contributor. There's a large part of the world's population who don't get proper nutrition today, even today. But yet 30-35% of all food that gets produced is lost and wasted.
Yes.
It's a system that is broken. So how do we address it? And there are so many areas that which is ripe for innovation, for disruption, and we want to get there. So we have already a few areas where we have started investing in, and we've built teams. So there's one where we've just launched a month ago, a platform which will enable companies to map their carbon footprint. It's an enterprise SaaS platform that will enable companies to map their carbon footprint and then manage and mitigate it. So that's one, and we're very hopeful about it. The other one that we launched that was a year and a half ago, which has now reached a certain scale. It's at between a Series A and a Series B, is where we set up a farmer services network for smallholder growers in Indonesia. So this is in South Sulawesi and East Java. We've got nearly 30,000 farmers using our platform to sell their produce and buy inputs. And we provide them with agri expertise and knowledge so that they can improve their crops and the yields. So very operational intense, while it's technology enabled, but operationally intense at the same time, because it's essentially servicing the last mile for farmers and smallholder growers. Now, these are people who often do not get fair price for their produce. We are disaggregating it, and we are providing them a price that is closer to international prices. There are 30,000 farmers. Next year, we plan to have around 70,000 farmers. Approximately this year, we're ending with 100,000 tons of corn that we have traded over the platform. Wow. Next year, we want to grow it to 600,000 tons. So it's a huge, massive business, and exponentially grow. And you clearly see the impact on the farmers. So this company is called Jiva, and I've gone to, and I met up with some of these growers, and the way they talk about how Jiva has impacted them positively and changed some of the practices and have brought more wealth for them, in what they've been doing for generations. It's amazing the kind of impact that some of these ideas have had. I'm very excited about what I'm getting into, and as I said, of course, I am a bit quite apprehensive also because I know very little about this field, but very excited.
Yeah. One of the things that for me has always stood out about your leadership is that your curiosity and willingness to learn and be open to learning from pretty much anywhere. And so I think that'll hold you in good stead as you really get into this role. We talk about mindful leadership a lot in our work, and that is about questioning the existing paradigms, right? It's about challenging status quo and finding new pathways that lead to better outcomes. And so what you shared about Olam's growth from a few hundred people to now 75,000 people and going through this massive transformation, what you shared about Jiva's work, all of it has required this thinking differently.
My organization's environment has helped me. Olam is an extremely entrepreneurial organization, and risk-taking is kind of built in. I'll take this particular example. So when I joined, it was actually survival for us in the initial 5-6 years. Every month, we had to really look at cash flows to even pay salaries. The employee population that we had was primarily blue-collar workers. They were from the communities. We felt that we could do a lot more, and we could be a pioneer in setting standards for this category of workers in the organization. Most of the parts of our operations, these were developing countries. And since we picked these people were from the communities, we were the only source of organized employment for them. We quickly realized that within the organization, we can set some standards of the way these employees should be treated. These are things like living wage. Do you really have to pay minimum wage? Can you pay a living wage? A living wage is often in many of these countries 30% more than the minimum wage. Can you ensure that in your supply chain, that means people who are supplying products to you, there is no employment of children, that everyone else in the supply chain is also paying the living wage and not just the minimum wage? Can we also ensure that basic amenities are available at their workplace? I've been to places where there are no toilets for women. Planned holidays are at least 1 or 2 days a week. 1 day a week is given to them. Fixed hours of working, transport to the workplace. So these were left unattended, these things. So we said we should set minimum standards across all our organizations, and we'll make it a tiered approach. So there was a big pushback saying the business will not be able to afford it. We are competing with the unorganized sector, and we'll have to wrap up our businesses and go home. So we pushed back on it, and we got people to start subscribing to this idea. And in this process, actually, the HR team, me and the small team that we had, we felt that it was the right thing to do. And we had to start getting the organization to think in these terms. So finally, we came out with a fair workers policy, and we set in some standards. So we said we will support you to evaluate where you are on this hierarchy of levels. In a short period of time, we found that each of our business leaders liked the idea and they got onto it. And more importantly, our customers, who are some of the biggest food brands today in the world, they started appreciating it. They
Right.
started saying that this is something that we want. We
Right.
believe that the reason why we would want to buy from you is because you have certain standards of how you operate.
Right.
And even more importantly, in many of these countries, because we are in a very sensitive area of food, this helped us to get the license to operate. Because in many of the other things we said, this is how we are improving communities by providing them employment at a certain standard. I think this is an example where you had to believe in it. It wasn't just something which is expedient. It was more something that we felt that we could make an impact as a team, and then went about, and we felt it was right for the company and the organization. And eventually, it was a good business decision also as it played out.
Yeah. What is fascinating about this story, Joydeep, is that what was thought to be a competitive disadvantage became a competitive advantage.
Absolutely.
And that is by simply questioning, right, the way that we have always done things. And why does it need to be that way? And I think it's such an important learning also for startups.
Things should be the right environment. This is coming from within you. This is a philosophy or a belief that we need to give an environment where people they see themselves growing in that environment.
Right.
Well, it's not something that is forced on you, because unemployment was rampant in some of those communities that we work in, actually.
Yeah. Your example goes back to the soul of the organization, right? That whether you're a startup or not, you have to have some clarity on who you are as an organization, who you are in relationship to the community, to your employees, to your partners, to your collaborators, etc., etc. But the fact that your team and you were able to hold up the mirror to have those conversations that were critical, you definitely made an impact in terms of company becoming what it is, core of the company, really.
In our organization, what people get more impressed with is your investment into that idea of yours, the passion, the commitment that you have. When they see that commitment there and that you're not giving up, they get influenced. So it is not so much the reams of data that we support it with. It is that we are at it continuously and we are not taking a no for a no. That is what I think impresses people, actually, and it's a passion that is behind what you're saying.
But that's actually a great tip on how to sell your idea to really senior leaders, right? Which is all about, you have to help them understand why is it so important, right?
Yeah.
Is there an issue? What is the issue? Because often there is a difference of opinion on whether there's an issue or not, or how expedient is the issue actually. And, does it need to be solved now or later, right? Can it wait? And again, why is it so important to you to be able to solve this? Why are you so passionate about it? Why are you not taking no for an answer? Those are really the things that actually help, right, to communicate to senior leaders all of the pieces of information, but more importantly, the why. They need to actually invest in it.
Yeah.
It's a great segue to talk about leadership. You know that your leadership has impacted me, certainly through my career. Most of us fall into leadership, and we don't often have the space to reflect about who we want to be as a leader before we actually get into leadership roles. And it's only that our journey starts once we are in those roles and we start sort of figuring out who we are as leaders. And so I'd love to know what that journey was like for you.
So if I look back, what has shaped my ways of working are people that I worked with, positive ways and a few times in negative ways also. They have allowed me to introspect on how I should be influencing others around me in my team or outside my team. Along the way, there have been leaders which have, I think, influenced me. And these leaders, they find members in the team who is able to support them. Second, they listen. They are aware of what are not their strengths. So they find people that they trust, whom they would often approach to give them valuable feedback of how they should moderate their styles.
One of my favorite stories about our time working together, and I was barely in the organization, less than 2 years at that point of time. The project that you gave me responsibility for was this employee engagement survey for the whole organization, impacting, I think, what, 15, 20,000 people in those days, right from having conversations with senior leaders to figure out what's working, what's not working with our existing survey as we were trying to revamp and create the new one, doing focus groups in the organization, to designing the survey, to figuring out how we would launch it online for the first time, to doing all the analysis and figuring out the insights. And you even took me to the presentations with Mr. Premji as well. So, trusting your team and empowering your team, but taking such a high risk on such a critical project, it's fascinating how you're able to do that with somebody who had no experience. You could have chosen to see inexperience, but you chose to see potential. And this is without regular reviews, without any micromanagement, without any million conversations of what's happening now and all of that stuff. Complete empowerment and complete autonomy. What's really helpful for a lot of our listeners and a lot of leaders, right, is to know how do you get to a point where you can have that kind of trust and faith in your team, even when they haven't earned it yet. I certainly had not earned it yet. You didn't know me well enough then. And so, but you took a chance anyway. We've been conducting listening labs and talking to people from different walks of life who have talked to us about their world of work, right? And of course, talked about leaders, the kind that help them blossom and the kind that don't. And they all talked about leaders taking a chance on them and how that has impacted them and helped them blossom. For me, I think it was the first time that I figured out that I was capable of more than I thought I was. The impact that you have is significant. What I'd love to know is, how do you get to that point where you're able to take that kind of a risk, empower people, even when they haven't earned it yet?
So, Shana, thank you so much for those lovely words. But I wish you said them 20 years ago when we were working together. But I'm sure that they're more.
I didn't want it to go to your head then.
But the fantastic words to hear. And right now, after so many years, I think at the core is being secure about yourself, about you, who you are as a leader, being secure about it, and having that confidence in yourself first. Take this example. 7 years ago, we overhauled our performance management system in the company. Engagement surveys, if there's after compensation, if there's anything else that gets the worst scores, it's performance management, right? So it wasn't working for many years. So he says, why do it? So I encouraged a discussion within the team saying that let's dump it, not have performance management. People don't, I mean, the team members don't want it. They give it very low scores. The managers think it's a chore. So eventually it has become the HR function's baby. We seem to be wedded to performance management. So let's ditch it. Let's not have it at all. And let's see if anyone misses it or not. Then people felt that no, that how can you give up something which has been the core of HR practices across. So they came back. I said, then you have to think of something which is very different. In its current state, it won't work. So eventually the team brainstormed and came back with saying that let's have a process which supports, where the biggest beneficiaries are the team members, not the bosses, not the organization. So we designed a process where the beneficiary is the team members. And the three things that they would want the process to address are, first is my role meaningful in the company? Does it have significance for me? The second is that, am I getting continuous feedback? How am I doing? If my role is meaningful, then you must tell me how am I doing in this role, and my future, my growth and future. These are three key things. So can we design a process where at the end of it, or at certain periods of time, we get people coming back to us and saying that, yes, these things are happening, that the process is addressing these. So we designed a complete new process, and in the process we said ratings don't work. Ratings come in the way of these three, because when you try giving a person a rating for performance, the whole conversation, it's only around the rating, and none of these get addressed. So and this is way before this became a trend in the industry.
Yes.
8 years ago, when we were introducing this, you can imagine in a traditional organization, while we are entrepreneurial and everything, and we are in the ag sector, unlike tech sector, is the last in accepting new trends, So there was pushback again, saying that what the hell are you suggesting? How can I not give a rating? How will I know who's a bad performer, who's not a good performer? How do I send messages across? And so we went through all of that. I said, the team, you guys have to take it forward. So the team went forward, and it got accepted. First, the CEO was, of course, convinced, and then the others came along and they were convinced about it. And today, we have this process working. So coming back to your question, am I secure of what am I doing? Am I convinced about it? Is it okay for me if some people don't do it right enough? So it's okay. I mean, these are things that it's a part of life. I mean, and they learn and pick up from it. So it's having confidence in the team. It's being secure about your own position in the organization and your tolerance for mistakes and failures.
Yeah.
So we keep saying that organizations should allow people to fail, but it's easier said than done, actually.
Yes.
I mean, you will allow people to fail in things that don't matter, but in critical events, how often would organizations tolerate failures? So that would be my take on it. Talent would refuse to work under managers or leaders who are not of this kind. If you have to hold on to your talent, your team, you have to be this way. So
that is true.
Right now, as we are going through this big change, 2 of my team members that I had hired 10 years, 15 years ago, they're taking over the 2 biggest roles in the organization. And I'm moving out into a very different role, but a much smaller role. And I'm comfortable with it.
Why is it important to you to be the kind of leader who takes a chance on their people and who leads with trust first and with empowerment first?
I like to see people that I'm in touch with, whether in the family, professionally, socially, in some ways, I'm enabling them. We've grown up in very critical environments where often what you can't do well gets pointed out first than what you can do well, right? So parents, school, everywhere. I mean, so what you should have done better, that has had a bearing on me. Well, I'm not completely out of it, but I try to leverage on people's strengths rather than what they're not doing well. So this whole thing about knowing my strengths and building on them and using that as my leverage is something that I have been trying to practice personally for myself and people that I work with or I am invested in. And that is important with team members also. Each person would have unique strengths, and being able to quickly unbundle them and allow them the freedom to practice their strengths and leverage their strengths and realize what their strengths are.
Let's pivot a little bit to inclusion, right? I know it's a favorite topic for both of us. We've done a whole lot of work on it as well. You and I were talking about this some time back, that one of the biggest things that a lot of leaders struggle with is how do you convert positive intent into conscious actions that truly move the needle on inclusion? And it goes back to the same conversation of how do you question existing paradigms in terms of talent processes? How do you challenge status quo? And how do you make decisions that lead to better outcomes? And so, could you share perhaps your thinking around some of those as you have gone through that leadership journey yourself on inclusion, some decisions that you might have made or questioned, right, that led you to a better outcome?
The journey on inclusion is a journey that I'm very invested in. So I'll just give you an example. We were operating in parts of Africa initially. When you're looking for talent, especially for our kind of businesses, where there is a lot of operational intensity on the ground, and you're looking for talent who can manage those operations uh, and independently in an empowered manner, because we don't have too much of oversight. It was not an easy journey for us to get that talent. We are used to a world where there are clear markers of talent. You go to any talent market, you know that there are educational qualifications, and you can benchmark those educational qualifications and use that as a proxy for talent. In large parts of Africa, those are missing. Those markers of talent are missing. That was a situation in the initial years, we were not used at all to it. Imagine if you did not have degrees on a profile, you're coming across a resume and you don't have any degrees there, and it's just experience, one experience after another, and you have to hire for different roles. Our selection processes at that point of time are not geared for that, where you hire based on just potential and capabilities and not a degree or an education qualification. So what we did is that we hired people from countries where talent was more easily available. We attracted them with a dollarized salary, and we expatriated them to Africa. It was a brilliant model that worked for us, but it was a very short-sighted one. When I joined the company, we already had a few such expats working in Africa. And the next 5 years, that's a model that I refined to the T. Go to these schools, hire from these schools. After a few years, I said, this is not a sustainable model. What is happening is there were cultural issues coming up in these countries because the senior leaders were expatriates and the rank and file were national employees, which was flaring up as we were growing in scale. In many of these countries where we had grown to a certain scale, again, people were questioning a license to operate, raised this issue within the organization. Why are we doing this? Why are we not hiring locals?
And also growth potential, right?
Yeah,
growth potential for existing
absolutely, for
employees.
existing, not there.
You would see no path.
Then the reasons I heard, there are not enough talent here. I said, what do you mean by talent? A definition of talent is exclusive, it excludes. So talent is, we want people who can speak English with fluency. So that's a barrier, difficult barrier to break, that someone who cannot speak English with a level of fluency and speaks a native language is seen not fit for a professional organization. That's the first barrier that the person faces.
There is a judgment there about
There's a judgment there about the educational qualification, about the environment that the person has grown up in. There's so many things that plays around when fluency is not there.
Which has nothing to do with performance or
capability or potential, nothing. The fluency, you can, and for some roles, you don't need to be fluent. And that was a point I was trying to make, that for most of our roles on the front line or in these countries, you don't need to have English. Just because your boss cannot understand what you're saying doesn't make you unfit for the role, because your customer can understand you much better than what he or she can make out of your boss who doesn't know the local language. So language was excluding people. It was our definition of other aspects of talent, numeracy skills. For many roles, numeracy skills, you needed just average numeracy skills. You don't need to be someone who can work with complex Excel spreadsheets. You don't need it. It wasn't required. When you have a different kind of an education, which is largely built on jobs that we have done along, you build a different set of capabilities, which does not come into the standard definition of talent when we go out to hire. So breaking those barriers, and they're not broken yet, we still get so influenced by what we call smart looking competencies. In the company, we have defined it as smart in a cynical way, of course. We don't want smart competencies. We don't want someone who can stand up there in half an hour, prepare a slides and make a presentation. No, most of our jobs don't require that. So I think we face this in the organization, and we haven't overcome this, but we have early on put a bar on hiring expats. Today, in that population where we were hiring expats, at one point we started 100% as expats. Today, we are at 25% who are expats. 75% are national hires, especially in these countries in Africa. So these are barriers that we create for ourselves. Yes, to your point.
It's a good mix because it helps cross-pollination of ideas.
The way culture gets defined, the ways of working gets defined when you have a very skewed population.
Right.
We created a platform for voices to be heard. So we, 26% of our work, our white collar workforce is women. So we tried covering as many people as possible in small groups, understanding what is the experience they're going through, what's their lived experience. And we were shocked to hear some of that we
Wow.
heard and saw. That is making us change the ways that we work to make it a far more inclusive environment. But there is a clear urgency for us to change the way we work.
Yeah. It's interesting because this is a paradigm that we don't talk about often enough, right? That it is not their diversity, but rather our inclusiveness, which is the issue, right? Whether it is in terms of hiring diverse talent or whether it is, any of these processes, promotion, advancement of people, putting people on task forces, giving them high visibility assignments, all of those things, it's not their diversity which is the issue, that they can't do a certain thing in the same way that everyone in those previous roles would have done it, because it's not even important to the role anymore. And so it's really a lack of our inclusiveness, and the fact that you zeroed in on that and solved for it with real action, not just words, is significant.
Yeah, I've not solved it. We have not solved it. I mean, so it's an issue, which is a complex
Well
issue,
said, well
and
said.
yeah,
Good.
we need to we are addressing it, but we have not overcome it.
There's so many more questions, Joydeep. And so what we tried to do is put all of them together in a rapid fire section. So first question, what was your first job ever?
My first job ever was when I was in school, when I was teaching another younger student, and I was getting paid for it. I mean, I don't know I mean, how the student later did in life. I hope the student picked up some of the better elements.
Second one. So you are one of the people who has probably the greatest wanderlust I've
Yeah.
ever known. And you've traveled to so many different countries. So if you had to think about how many countries have you actually traveled to? And what has been your most off the beaten path vacation yet?
My work has taken me, and my own our own travel plans have taken me to more than 68 countries in the last 12
Wow.
years. So what's been off the beaten track? Chile, where you go to Patagonia in Chile and you see expanse and space and beauty, pristine beauty like never before. Patagonia in Chile, where we drove around for a few days. Uh, Alaska, we went to Alaska 10 years ago. Alaska, again, it's a wilderness. Uh, and we just loved Alaska and would love to go back again. Spending a week in height of winter in complete darkness, 24-hour darkness in Tromso. Tromso is within the Arctic Circle in Norway, northern Norway. And we spent a week wanting to experience how any resident of the Arctic region would live their lives in winter. So we just rented an apartment and spent a week there. It's amazing. It's incredible, absolutely. So so there's a theme that runs through doing things which you normally don't get to do in your everyday life, especially if you're living in Singapore. Wilderness, expanse, space, and nature.
A question that probably comes out of that one is, you also have a really adventurous palate, right? You've tried food, of course, across all of these 68 countries. What has been the most adventurous food that you've tried and been surprised pleasantly by it?
Food is another passion for me. And everywhere I go, first thing I do is try out local cuisine. South America has pleasantly surprised me. And then which parts of South America? Uh, Actually, many parts of South America. Peru, Lima is a heaven for people who like food. There are so many budding chefs. So Mexico, Mexican food in Mexico. So I was in Puebla, which is a couple of hours from Mexico. Amazing uh, food there, amazing food, and very unique to that part of Mexico. I forget the name of the dish, but it's made out of ant eggs. The dish is made out
Oh,
of ant eggs, and it's a delicacy. It was incredible. It was so good. Sometimes you try out these food because of to for to talk about it, in circles. It kind of impresses people. But here, it was so delicious that I'd love to have it again.
Have you ever had a reverse mentor?
Even now, I'm mentoring two people. So I have carefully chosen my mentees to be people who are in the early part of their careers. And for me, I've learned, I suppose, more than what they would have probably learned from me. It's been a huge learning experience for me, the time that I spent with them. And it has helped me to understand essentially what is of significance for people who are starting their careers today, or in the early part of their careers today. What do they find of significance? And I'm surprised by what I get to learn. Uh, we keep hearing about the Great Resignation, right? And I've tried checking that out with some of them in my mentoring sessions. And what I understand for them is, again, they want to do things and be involved in areas which they feel have meaning for them, personally for them. They feel have meaning for them, and not. And I think you guys, both of you and Shriram, have been on this journey the last 2 years, and you're into something that has true meaning for you. And I see that so very often coming up in my conversations, and they are willing to take risks to satisfy this urge.
Right.
That's one thing that I've learned. Second is flexibility. It has become so important for people who are in the early part of their careers that they want flexibility built into the way they work, and how organizations are able to provide them with it.
That's such a great point. And, in the listening labs that we've conducted, one of the things that we have sort of understood, people are on a quest for not just flexibility, but autonomy.
Yep.
So it is having the ability and the power to decide when, where, how
Absolutely. Yeah.
work gets done, right?
Absolutely.
And how work fits in better into my life. Recession or not, or whatever the future of work evolves to, the fact is that feeling that people have of being on that quest for autonomy is not going away anywhere.
Absolutely.
And therefore, what does leadership of the future look like? The pandemic triggered the largest experiment of remote work in human history, right? And leaders came under the glare of a million spotlights. And so it's almost like they were thrown into the deep end. What do you see leadership really evolving to, right? That really can support people and their quest for flexibility, autonomy, and meaning?
A very thought-provoking question there. Let me step back. So during the last 2 years in the pandemic, organizations, it was a humanitarian crisis first. So most organizations reacted very well, and they made the health and safety of their workforce and their customers and suppliers as a topmost priority. So organizations that were able to quickly establish some of the good things that we're doing and institutionalize them, like most organizations, we started listening to our employees far more frequently. For our organization, every quarter we used to have a survey, and we slowed it down today. Now it is once in 6 months, but it can't be any slower than that. So every organization, the things that they were doing well, they need to quickly capture them, institutionalize those practices. It's important for us to continue with that sense of urgency that was there in those 2 years and in these areas, and not allow it to slide back.
The next question is about advice, right? So what's one piece of advice that has helped you in your career?
I think this exercise that you put me on, and we've been discussing about it, you made me reflect on a lot of things. I think reflection is so critical. I don't do it enough. It is taking a deeper look at ourselves, at what is driving us, what have we done in the last week, what happened, like was the term that you used. So, I mean,
Automaticity.
without what did we do without thinking, what we should have done with some thinking. I think it was who's this author who wrote about two kinds of decisions we make. One kind is decisions which are instinctive, reactions that are very instinctive, and that is 80. Daniel Kahneman. Yes, so that is instinctive, and 80% of most of what we do is we do without thinking, and that how that takes over our lives. And unfortunately, even decisions that we should not be taking in such a manner, we tend to do it because that comes so naturally. And the other is the deep decision making. I think reflection often enough allows us to think over some of these things. And it's such a transient world we live in today with all the devices and everything else. We are losing that ability to reflect. And I think that is the one thing that forget advising others. That's something that I would like to do more often going forward.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And, the work that we are doing is really leaning on those ideas to figure out how we can help leaders make better and more inclusive decisions more often across the employee life cycle. And that, I think, is really the key, right? To be able to help leaders create those experiences of inclusion for their people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Joydeep, this was so much fun. And thank you for spending this time chatting with us.
Thank you, Shana, for inviting me. So thank you. All the best.